Welcome to It Happened in Grand Prairie as we bring you the history of our city and also bring you some very important people that have made history and are continuing to make history this very day. We're very delighted to bring you history tape number 417. This will be played during the month of February 2001, for this is the magic month that we celebrate Black history. And we are delighted and honored today to have a very special young man with us today. Larry McCarty, welcome to the set, young man.
Thank you, Ms. Jackson.
Larry, it's so wonderful to have you on the dais today to be able to document your successes and your life during this special History Month. And we would ask you to look out into your camera and tell us about the real Larry McCarty. Tell us maybe where you were born, when you were born, name your parents, siblings if you have them, and if you'd like to expand on that a little bit more to tell us where they are today. Now is your time, young man.
Okay. Well, first of all, Ruthie, I would like to thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to be here with you today.
You're welcome.
I like to tell the story of who I am, being a native Texan, and we always say Texans, we like to think we're pretty big. But I'm Larry Wayne McCarty. I was actually born in Houston, Texas in 1949. My parents are Annie Mae McCarty, who is still living today. Annie Mae was born in June 27th, 1910, so that makes mother about 90 years old today.
And what is her maiden name? Could we have that?
She is Annie Mae Green.
All right.
And my father is W.T. McCarty. W.T. is deceased at this time. I have one sister, Ledora Wilson, and Ledora lives in Houston, Texas. And I had one brother who is recently deceased, who is Otis McCarty. But again, we actually, we grew up in West Texas, grew up in a town called Midland. I graduated high school there, and shortly after leaving Midland High School, attended Odessa Junior College for a short time there, prior to moving to California, being recruited for the military, and spending my two and a half years in Vietnam.
All right, we're going to stop you at Vietnam, and we're going to backtrack just a little bit. And were you born in Midland?
No, I was actually born in Houston, Texas, born in a hospital. I'm not sure if it's still standing today, but it was Jefferson Davis County Hospital at that time.
All right.
In Houston, Texas.
All right, and as you, when did you leave Houston, and is that when you went to Midland?
No, my family, as I said, being born in 1949, shortly thereafter, let's say 2 or 3 years, we moved to a small community in Madisonville, Texas.
Yes.
Madisonville is a small community about 99 miles that would be north of Houston.
Yes.
I lived there, attended first grade, second, and third grade there.
Now that's what we wanted.
Yes.
When did you start to school in Madisonville?
Not sure of the year, but there are some very interesting stories about my time there.
All right.
And my first grade teacher happened to be my aunt, my mother's sister.
Let's name her.
Her name is Marguerite Sanders. In fact, Marguerite is probably 74 years old today, still lives in the Madisonville community.
Oh, and that was your first grade teacher?
And that was my first grade teacher.
What was the name of the school you attended?
The school there at the time was called Marian Anderson. Marian Anderson was the school that we attended.
Okay.
And I had aunties in the second and third grade, and Marguerite again. She always said, I like to talk in class. Every time she had a question, with her being my auntie, I would immediately raise my hand.
Oh, of course.
She always tells me she was pretty glad when I left her class.
You got all the attention because you demanded it. You demanded it.
Yes, I did.
All right. And after the third grade, what happened to Larry then?
After the third grade, my mother, I was raised in a single parent home with just my mother and the 3 kids. After the third grade, my mother moved to Midland, Texas.
Okay.
But I remember the period of a move in that when she moved to Midland, she went down to find work. And while she was gone, we stayed with my auntie, Marguerite, her sister, for a number of months. And then my mother sent for us, if you will. And Marguerite Sanders and her husband, Winston Sanders, who is deceased today, drove us to Midland.
To Midland from Madisonville.
From Midland from Madisonville, and that's where we joined my mother.
What'd you think about the trip?
Very, very long.
Very long.
I think from Madisonville, Texas to Midland must be about 400 miles. So for as a young child, it was a very long
and traumatic
experience.
Yes, it was. And when you got out to Midland and down in the East Texas, Madisonville area, there's the tall pines, the beautiful trees. You get to Midland, and what did you find?
Well, one of the things we noticed in the drive to Midland is once you are west of Abilene, there is not a bump in the road.
That is true.
So from Abilene to Midland, I don't think we saw anything but mesquite bush and flat land.
Yes, yes.
But I remember arriving in Midland. My mother at that time was, she was sharing a room with a lady, and I don't recall her name.
Yes.
But we joined her there, and shortly after we had a small house or apartment. I remember it being a small shotgun house, of the houses of the time. The house was painted green in color. I remember there being a living room and a kitchen or cooking area.
Yes.
And I remember my family, my mother, my sister, my brother, and I all sharing the same sleeping space in this small house.
Yes, yes, and glad to get it.
And glad to get it.
All right, where'd you start to school in Midland?
When we arrived in Midland, I was in the 4th grade.
All right.
And I actually attended the school that was Booker T. Washington Elementary.
Good.
And attended Booker T. Washington in the 4th grade. And shortly after the 4th grade, there was a new school being built on the south side of town. It was called Ralph J. Bunch Elementary. This was a brand new school on the south side of Midland.
Okay.
And in the 5th and 6th grade, I attended Ralph J. Bunch.
All right, any favorite teachers? Now, up till when you got into this 4th grade and you got out into a new town, new school, new friends, were there special teachers in the 4th or 5th or 6th grade that really gave Larry a stability shot in the arm?
Well, the first teacher that I can recall in the 4th grade was a teacher called Mrs. Hill. The thing that I remember about Mrs. Hill is Mrs. Hill was a wonderful and warm person. Mm-hmm. Not only was she an elementary school teacher, but she did mothering, if you will.
Yes.
And so I remember her very much as my 4th grade teacher. My 6th grade teacher, if I skip my 5th grade, I don't recall her name, was a gentleman by the name of Mr. Allen.
All right.
The thing that I remember about Mr. Allen was very tall and athletic, and I remember just fun times in his class, being a pretty fair student and just enjoying being a student of Mr. Allen, and that was my 4th, 5th, and 6th grade time in Midland.
After Bunch, what school did you attend? On to middle school?
Well, at that time we didn't have what we call middle school.
All right.
After leaving Ralph J. Bunch, I attended George Washington Carver, which was a junior and senior high school. The thing that's very interesting about not only attending school at George Washington Carver, but as a young high school student, I played football there.
Oh, great.
And it's interesting in that our current, I'm going to think of Mr. Williams, who is state, I will recall shortly. But Johnny Williams was the football coach there in Midland.
Did he impress you?
Very much so. The thing that I think that he taught outside of football was some character and leadership.
Character counts, doesn't it?
And his son today is the head of the Railroad Commission here in the state of Texas.
Oh, yes.
So that Mr. Williams is the son.
That is Mr. Williams. Oh, man.
That is the son of Johnny Williams, who was my football coach.
Who was your football coach?
Yes, so those were interesting times.
Yes, it was. It certainly was. And then from George Washington Carver on to Midland High?
Yeah, after, in 1967, I believe, or it might have been 65, when I reached the 10th grade, integration had come about.
Yes.
Prior to that time, the schools that I had attended, Marion Anderson, Booker T. Washington, Ralph J. Bunch, and George Washington Carver, those were all black schools at the time. So in 1965, the schools integrated in Midland. I believe that is the correct date. And I lived on the north side of town. And the students on the north side of town in that year we started to attend Midland High School.
Yes.
So I attended Midland High School for 2 years and graduated from Midland in 1967.
That's too fast. Now, here you are moving from a black high school to an integrated school over in Midland on the wrong side of the tracks as far as you were concerned. Tell me about your experience. Someone in our viewing audience would love to know how Larry took to that.
It was a very interesting experience in that, having lived, quote unquote, in an all-black community other than playing sports, baseball. I remember our first year at Midland High School, my junior year, was pretty traumatic. The thing that I recall the most about that occasion is that Midland High was the Midland High School Bulldogs.
Yes.
And in the middle of the entry hall, there was a big purple bulldog. The black students were not familiar with the Midland tradition.
Yes.
And I remember we walked in and we walked through the hall and we actually walked across the bulldog. There was a lot of, let's just say, name calling, other things happened, and there were actually fights from walking across the dog.
Yes.
So I think after we made it through our first year, things were okay.
Yes.
I don't recall any traumatic experiences at Midland. It was just a growing experience, and there weren't volatile racial difficulties that I can recall at the time, and I recall my time there being pretty happy going to Midland High School.
All right, Midland High School, favorite teacher, favorite subject academically, and favorite other subjects?
Well, I don't recall specifically. I think the principal then, or might have been a counselor, was Mr. Mashburn was his last name.
All right.
I remember Mr. Mashburn very, very fondly. And I also remember a teacher that I had in math who was also my football teacher. We called him Coach Rouse. The thing that was interesting about Coach Rouse is that often on Friday nights when we left to go home for the weekend, Coach Rouse was a big Star Trek fan.
Uh-huh.
And instead of saying, well, you need to study your mathematics for the weekend, Coach Rouse would challenge us to watch Star Trek and tell them about it on Monday. So
yes.
That was kind of a fun event, communicating with Coach Rouse.
Yes, it was. Very unusual for a math major, right?
Yes, it was.
All right, and when you graduated, was there any special mentor or someone that encouraged you to go to college, or did you get a scholarship?
No, my mother was a domestic.
Yes.
And raising 3 kids alone. The thing that's very interesting is that when I left Midland High School, initially I attended Odessa Junior College. It was a junior college at the time.
Yes.
And I was able to attend based on her earnings. So regardless of how lean things were, I was provided with that opportunity.
That's great.
And then, as I said, shortly after that, attended Odessa for a while and then migrated to California.
All right.
And was actually drafted in California into the military. And
All right,
from there
what
to Vietnam.
branch of the military?
For the U.S. Army.
And where did you train?
I trained actually in Fort Ord, California.
All right.
In California. And did my basic training in Fort Ord also. And then from Fort Ord, was actually sent to Vietnam. I remember...
What did you do in Vietnam? What was your specialty for the Army?
Before I tell you about the specialty, I'll tell you something that's a little funny. In going to Vietnam, all the young guys were probably pretty afraid at that time, being about 19 years old. Remember, we flew to Vietnam. I remember the flight being excruciatingly long, thinking about 19 hours.
Yes.
So we knew that we were flying into a war zone, so we took this flight and we landed there, and we landed at Long Binh, Vietnam. Was the city that we actually landed in, which was a military base.
Yes.
And I remember us getting off the military base, and they were asking us to move quickly, so we were almost in a run.
Yes.
So that's what I remember about being there. But as far as what did I do in Vietnam, my MOS was, and I don't recall the number, but I was an armor. And what the armor was responsible for was handling the military rifles, equipment, that was actually locked up, and we actually issued it as the need arose.
Okay, that was wonderful. That was better than being out as a medic and having to go out into the fields and bring in people, right?
Yes, it was. It was pretty interesting in that after going to Long Bend, my first assignment was at Long Bend. No, it was at Benoit. Benoit was the name of my first station there. But it was interesting in that it was an Air Force base.
Yeah.
So being in the Army, we had an opportunity to occasionally go to the Air Force mess hall. The thing that was different is that in the Army mess hall, we had trays, metal trays and things. But if we could get an opportunity to go to the Air Force base, they actually had plates.
Wow.
And so we felt very, very good about going to the Air Force. The food was better, the conditions were better. And so I spent almost a year and a half in Vietnam.
Okay.
And then shortly after being in Benoit, I was transferred again to a place called Phu Loi. And Phu Loi was, I think it was a little farther north, and I ended up spending my time there. And then I had the option of, after you serve a year in country, they would cut some of your military time. And so I extended beyond the initial 12 months. And
Yes.
so I really only did 21 months total. And then I was actually released. It was very interesting. I arrived back in the United States from Vietnam Valentine's Day, 1971.
That's tomorrow is your anniversary,
That's
isn't
the anniversary. That's how I remember, not necessarily Valentine's Day, but that special event.
it? That very most special event. And you
Yes,
came
indeed.
back into the States where?
I came back into Los Angeles, where I had left from previously.
Okay.
And the thing that was very interesting about that is that prior to being drafted in the military service, I had an opportunity to work for IBM.
Okay.
So I joined IBM in an administrative capacity, working in a supply room, or book room, if you will.
In where?
This was in Los Angeles,
In Los
California.
Angeles, okay.
In fact, it was at 3424 Wilshire Boulevard.
Yes.
And 3424 Wilshire Boulevard is located across the street from the Brown Derby.
Yes.
And also next to the Ambassador Hotel, where Kennedy was assassinated.
A very famous spot.
Yes,
isn't
it is a very famous spot.
All right, going to IBM, what happened to Larry after IBM in California? I know you're not there now.
No, it was really a great opportunity. As we talk a little bit about my life and studying, as I said, I worked in an area where there were many, many technical books. And one of the things that I've always done, I've always read books. And there was a gentleman by the name of Jim Davis, 30 years ago, or maybe 32 years ago. He would always walk into the supply room and he would see me busy or reading a book, and he would ask me, why was I reading the book? And I would tell him that I was learning so that I could do things better. So one of the things that happened there is Jim Davis recommended me to a gentleman who hired me in my first job in IBM as a computer operator.
How wonderful,
And
way
so that
back
was the
when.
first step. And this
Way.
was in might have been, I'm going to say 72, after I returned from Vietnam.
Back in the dark ages of
Of
the computers. Yes.
And the gentleman that hired me was a gentleman by the name of Don Romney. And so I stayed with IBM through that early stages. And in 1979, I believe, IBM transferred. I worked for a group that was called HONES. It was Hands-On Network Engineering, or something to that
Yes.
effect. And I was actually transferred to Palo Alto, California. And I worked for IBM in Palo Alto, California. I actually lived in a town called Sunnyvale, but IBM was actually located in Palo Alto. So I worked in Palo Alto, commuted a few miles back and forth
Yes.
until 1980.
In 1980, what happened to Larry?
And in 1980, I had gone through the ranks of computer operator, senior operator, supervisor, etc. And I got an opportunity in 1980 to transfer with IBM to Columbus, Ohio, and transferred to Columbus, Ohio as a systems engineer for IBM, and worked at the IBM location on Town Street in Columbus. In fact, that's where I met my wife, in Columbus,
Oh, we're
Ohio.
getting to the good part now.
Yes.
From Columbus, Ohio. And
Columbus, Ohio.
introduce our viewing audience to your wonderful wife, and it's Nyla.
Nyla.
Nyla?
My wife is Nyla. Nyla is, her maiden name is Ware. Her mother is Ethel Comalander.
Okay.
And her father is George Ware. And they're both living in Columbus, Ohio.
Okay.
And Nyla has three brothers. George Arnold III is her oldest brother. Gregory Lynn Ware is her second brother. and Gary. And his name is Gary Lynn also. We kid our mother that she ran out of names. She named the two boys Lynn. So Gary Lynn.
She liked that name.
She liked that name. And they also today live and work in Columbus, Ohio.
How did you ever get her to Texas?
Well, when we, after working with IBM, I was transferred again. There was an acronym that was used by people that had been around IBM a while, is that IBM stood for I've been moved.
Yeah.
And Nile and I, after we were married, I transferred again, and this time I transferred to the Dallas area. I actually worked in Las Colinas off of John W. Carpenter Freeway for IBM.
Yes.
I worked there in a technical capacity. The last assignments that I had with IBM, I was a technical instructor and did satellite or television kind of technical training.
Wonderful.
And then Nala today works for a company called Data Medical Association in Arlington, and she's been there about 10 or 12 years.
Do you all have children?
Yes, we do. We have two boys. My oldest son is Michael Dwight McCarty, who I named after my absolute best friend. And Michael he's 18 years old. He's a senior at South Grand Prairie High.
He is a warrior.
Yes, he is a warrior. And hopefully in September he will go to college, and right now he's leaning toward Southwest Texas State.
Good.
And my youngest son is Eric Ryan McCarty, who's also named after my best friend. And Eric attends Truman Middle School, and they are both sports enthusiasts.
Both sports-minded.
Yes, they are.
And do they pull Dad and Mom out, and you have to go to all of these games and all of these activities and et cetera?
Yes, they do. I think,
You're a good dad, aren't you?
I try to do. I think one of the things, the responsibilities of a parent is to participate and lead the young children. Mm-hmm. So we have gone through the whole process of being soccer dad, soccer mom, football mom, baseball mom, basketball mom and dad. So we have gone through the entire cycle of participating with our kids at every level.
And running a McCarty taxi service just for the boys and their friends.
That's the way it is. What you find is when you have multiple children, often on Saturday mornings, specifically when they were younger, we would find ourselves going in different directions
Yes.
as we pass by
Yes.
each other. And as they get older, you run less, but you do just as much work.
I was so impressed in reading your bio that you have chosen one of the most magnificent areas of Grand Prairie, the newer built out Westchester, which has PIDs to take care of their beautification, so many things. Why a choice of that? You could have lived near Las Colinas. You had a choice of living anywhere, Larry. We have 5 more minutes on this interview, and we've got to talk a little more.
Okay. Well, one of the things that led us to Grand Prairie is that my wife wanted to be fairly close to the children.
Yes.
So we could get to them quickly if we needed. And we selected Grand Prairie. First of all, the housing cost in Grand Prairie we found to be pretty moderate compared to some other areas. And at the time, Joe Pool Lake had just opened, and we are sports enthusiasts. We own a boat, and we wanted to be able to use the boat. So we selected Grand Prairie, specifically Westchester, so we could have access to Joe Pool Lake and some of the other surroundings that we have, like the state park.
Good.
And that led us to Grand Prairie.
All right. What do you do for a hobby? Where you are still working in Las Colinas,
Yes, I am.
and you're still with IBM?
No, I actually left IBM in 1992. I accepted the buyout program, and so 2 years ago, on February the 2nd, I became eligible to retire as a full-time IBMer. So I'm an IBM retiree with 30 years of service, and today I work for Fidelity Investment, and Fidelity Investment is in Irving, still in the technology arena.
Oh, that is wonderful. For a young man to be retired after 30 years and still have a full life ahead of them, I think you are to be congratulated. I know that you must have a message to the young people that start out with absolutely zero, maybe, other than parents' encouragement and good mentoring. Would you look out into your camera and let's show and tell 1 or 2 pictures that you have, and then make a little message to the boys and girls. Would you do that?
Well, it's not so much a picture, and I do have some old pictures here, But one of the things that I would like to say that's the most important thing is you have to have some goal in life, regardless of how large or how small. Often you will fall down or not necessarily be successful in the first things that you try.
Yes.
But you must continue. The things that I think that mean as much as your training, your education, is to have what I consider a quality of character.
Good.
And one of the things that I share with my boys is that if you're honest and you have character, there will be opportunities because people will not mind sharing or providing you those opportunities. And so that would be my tale or my story to the young people.
To the young people. Mm-hmm. And if you had parents out there that are having difficulty with their boys and girls, do you have anything to share with parents to encourage them?
Well, I think one of the things that we have to realize is this is a different era for young people. I think as adults, one of the things that we have a tendency not to do is we don't necessarily listen. I do not agree with everything that my young men have to say, but I have to give them an opportunity to share that, and then I can evaluate the actions to take based on that.
Oh, that's wonderful. Larry, we're down to about 2 minutes. Is there anything that you would like to say about Grand Prairie, or this is your last 2-minute testimony, and I give you all the time, and this is your camera if you want to show and tell or talk it.
Well, the thing I would like to say about Grand Prairie, I've had wonderful opportunities in Grand Prairie. Today, as I sit here and visit with Ruthie Jackson, she's a person that's very special to me. I've had a chance to meet Mayor Ingalls, I've met bankers, and I've met other people. And the thing that I can say and share with you is they have been very, very open and have extended every opportunity that's extended to any citizen in the city of Grand Prairie. And I call Grand Prairie my home, and I'm glad to be here.
Wonderful. And we want to thank you and your wife for making not only a wise choice, in our opinion, but the fact that you've added to the quality of life with your family here in Grand Prairie, Texas, building your home, making a real great investment of yours in Grand Prairie out in the Westchester community, and raising 2 young men that I know that you're going to be proud of, and Grand Prairie is going to be proud of them too. And we want to thank you for the time that you've given us today to help us celebrate Black History Month, because you are a success story, beginning from the segregated schools to the unsegregated schools with a single parent that raised 3 young people. And I think it's just a magnificent testimony to your mother and to your upbringing, shall I say. Thank you, Larry.
Thank you very kindly for having me.
It's been delightful, and even though you've left IBM, you still have an IBM heart. You're moving on to the next step, aren't you?
Well, I would like to say that we have a slogan, One Fidelity. So rather than IBM today, I like to say One Fidelity. And again, thank you for having me.
This is Ruthie Jackson reminding you that history is as we live and do.